My teacher believed that asthma was a psychological defect, a weakness of character that could be cured with willpower and a little bit of suffering. To prove her theory, she confiscated my inhaler, along with two others, and held our class hostage. She promised us a lesson in honesty, but by the end of the hour, one of my friends would be dead, and her classroom would be a crime scene. The first sign of trouble was a faint, familiar whistle in my own lungs. It was the ghost of the mile run from PE class, a specter that always haunted me in the period immediately following. I was sitting in English, the droning of the clock on the wall a dull metronome counting down to the weekend, when the tightening in my chest began its insidious creep. It wasn't a panic yet, just a warning. I reached into the side pocket of my backpack, my fingers searching for the cool, L-shaped plastic of my emergency inhaler. It was a motion as practiced and unconscious as breathing itself, or, rather, as practiced as the fight to keep breathing. Before my fingers could close around it, another hand shot out, intercepting mine. It was bony and cold, with perfectly manicured nails that seemed almost predatory. "And what, precisely, do you think you're doing?" Miss Grant's voice was like ice water down my spine. She held the inhaler aloft, pinched between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a distasteful insect. The entire class fell silent, the air thick with the sudden, unwelcome tension. "We just came back from PE. I managed to wheeze out, the effort of forming the words already making the constriction in my throat worse. Each word was a small battle, fought and won at a cost of precious oxygen. A thin, dismissive smile played on her lips. "Asthma," she declared, her voice ringing with the unshakable conviction of the dangerously misinformed, "is a psychological failing, a crutch for the weak-willed." Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room. She wasn't just talking to me. She was performing. She pushed herself off the edge of her desk and began to pace through the aisles, a predator on the hunt. Her gaze landed on Marcus, a sweet, quiet boy who loved sketching superheroes in his notebook. He was already breathing a little heavily. "Marcus," she said, her voice deceptively soft. "Your inhaler, please." He looked up, confused and scared, and wordlessly handed it over. Next, her sights fell on Lily, a girl so timid she barely spoke above a whisper. Lily clutched her inhaler to her chest as if it were a holy relic. Miss Grant simply stood over her, her hand outstretched, until Lily, trembling, surrendered her lifeline as well. Holding the three devices in her palm like captured trophies, she returned to the front of the classroom. "When I was your age," she began, her voice taking on the tone of a zealot delivering a sermon, "my parents recognized my own fabricated breathing problems for what they were, a bid for attention. Their cure was simple. They made me run 5 miles every single morning, rain or shine. It taught me resilience. It taught me that the mind has dominion over the body." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Now, I am doing the same for you." Katie, who had a spine of steel and a fierce loyalty to her friends, shot up from her desk. "Miss Grant, that's insane. I've seen her have attacks before. It's real. She could get really sick." Miss Grant's head snapped toward her, her eyes flashing with anger. "Sit down, Catherine, or you will have detention for the rest of the semester. Do not test me." Katie, seething, slowly sank back into her chair. With a sense of grim ceremony, Miss Grant walked to the steel medical cabinet mounted on the wall. She dropped our inhalers inside, the clatter of plastic on metal echoing in the silent room. She locked the cabinet with a loud, definitive click and pocketed the key. A cold dread, far more potent than the tightening in my lungs, washed over me. I did a frantic mental calculation. 20 minutes. Maybe less. 20 minutes until my airways constricted so much that no air could get through at all. As if she could hear the frantic ticking of the clock in my head, she then walked to the classroom door, grabbed the back of her heavy, solid oak desk, and with a grunt of effort, began to drag it across the floor. The screech of the wooden legs against the linoleum was a sound of pure agony, a physical manifestation of the horror rising in the room. She positioned the desk squarely in front of the door, a heavy, immovable barricade. Then, with an air of absolute authority, she sat upon it, crossing her legs like a queen on a throne. "Nobody leaves this room," she announced, her voice calm and chillingly steady, "until you three admit that you are faking." A small, brave hand went up in the back. It was Sarah. But, but what if they're not faking?" she stammered. "They are," Miss Grant replied, her certainty absolute. The air in the room was becoming thick, not just with tension, but with a palpable lack of oxygen for those of us who needed it most. I glanced at Marcus. His face, normally a warm brown, was taking on a concerning reddish, almost purple hue. Lily was clutching her chest, her knuckles white, her breaths coming in small, shallow pants. The balloon inside my own lungs was inflating relentlessly, a monstrous, internal pressure squeezing out all the space where air was supposed to go. And that was when my twin brother, Jake, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, decided to open his stupid, perfect mouth. "She's such a drama queen," he said with an audible eye roll, loud enough for the whole class to hear. "Last year, she totally faked an asthma attack to get out of running the mile in track." Miss Grant's face lit up like a Christmas tree. It was the exact validation she had been craving. "See," she exclaimed, beaming a triumphant smile around the room. "Even your own brother knows you're manipulating everyone." The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking what little air I had left out of me. She reached behind her, her back to the class, and I heard the unmistakable, heavy thunk of the deadbolt being thrown. She then strode over to the tall windows lining the far wall and, with a series of sharp clicks, threw each one wide open. A chilly autumn breeze swept through the room, carrying the scent of damp leaves and car exhaust. "Fresh air and willpower," she chirped, turning back to face us. "That's all the medicine you truly need." A violent, racking cough seized me, doubling me over. "Please," I choked out, the word a ragged, desperate plea. Across the room, I could see Emma, her best friend, with tears streaming down her face. "Just let them use their inhalers," she begged. "What if something terrible happens?" "The only thing happening here," Miss Grant retorted, her voice hard as steel, "is a much-needed lesson in honesty." That was the last straw for Mike. He was a big guy, a lineman on the football team, and he was not one for sitting idly by. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm getting out of here," he stated, his voice a low growl. He started for the door, his intent clear. Grant didn't even flinch from her perch on the desk. "Try it," she said coolly. "You'll be expelled before your hand touches the handle." Mike froze, the threat hanging in the air, thick and undeniable. He looked from her to us, his face a mask of helpless fury, and slowly returned to his seat. My ribs felt like they were on fire, each attempt to draw a breath a fresh wave of agony. That's when I saw Aiden, in the back corner, subtly angling his phone, trying to secretly record what was happening. But Grant had some kind of sixth sense, a teacher radar honed by years of catching kids cheating. Her head whipped around. "Aiden," she snapped. She was across the room in a flash, snatching the phone from his hand. And then, in the next instant, she hit the light switch, and the world plunged into absolute, disorienting blackness. "There," her voice echoed, disembodied and menacing in the dark. "Now you can't collaborate on your lies anymore." If there was panic before, it was nothing compared to what erupted now. The darkness was a catalyst, transforming our fear into pure, primal terror. Multiple students started banging on their desks, the sound of frantic, chaotic drumbeat of desperation. "Let us out." That was Jason, his voice cracking. "This isn't legal." Rebecca's voice was shrill, on the verge of hysteria. Suddenly, a muffled knocking came from the other side of the door. "Everything okay in there?" It was Mr. Wong, the history teacher from next door. A surge of desperate hope shot through me. Half the class screamed at once.
No.
"Help US. She's locked US in. She won't let US leave." Grant moved with terrifying speed in the darkness. We heard the deadbolt slide back. She cracked the door just a sliver, using her own body to block the opening and muffle our frantic cries. Her voice, when she spoke to him, was sickeningly sweet. "Just doing some dramatic reading, Mr. Wong. The lights are off for atmosphere." There was a pause, and then I heard his footsteps fading away down the hall. Our last hope was gone. "You're all getting suspended," Grant roared, her voice a thunderclap in the oppressive darkness. I heard the distinct sound of a thermos being unscrewed. "Real healing," she whispered, more to herself than to us. I heard her fumbling through the aisles, bumping into desks in the dark. Someone yelped as she stepped on their foot. "Where are you?" she muttered, her voice a low hiss. I tried to slide down in my chair, to make myself invisible, to hold my breath, but my body betrayed me. A tiny, constricted wheeze escaped my lips. "There you are." A hand landed heavily on my shoulder, fingernails digging into my skin like talons. "Drink this," she commanded, her voice right next to my ear. "It will open your airways." I tried to resist, to push her away, but I was already weak, dizzy from the lack of air, my limbs feeling like lead. A hot, metallic object was forced against my lips. Scalding liquid poured into my mouth, burning, searing. I screamed and choked, the liquid fire scorching a path down my throat. It was an overwhelming, chemical taste of mint, so strong it was suffocating. The potent vapor hit my already swollen and inflamed throat, triggering a coughing fit so violent, so deep and rattling, I thought my ribs would crack apart. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, blindingly bright after the profound darkness. My lips felt thick and numb, alien. 3 of my female classmates were surrounding me, their faces etched with horror, trying to help me sit up. "You're insane," Katie screamed at Grant, her voice raw with fury. "They're dying." A warm, metallic fluid filled my mouth.
Blood.
I coughed, and it spattered across the surface of my desk in bright red droplets. I looked over and saw, to my horror, that Marcus was coughing up blood too. Lily was slumped in her chair, barely conscious, her chest making tiny, rasping, gasping sounds, like a fish out of water. "Anyone who makes another sound gets 2 weeks detention," Grant stated, her voice eerily calm in the midst of the unfolding tragedy. But nobody cared about detention anymore. The world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this classroom, to the life-or-death struggle playing out within them. Sarah was on her knees next to Marcus, her hands on his shoulders, sobbing hysterically. "Please wake up. Please wake up, Marcus." Emma was frantically tearing through every backpack within reach, a desperate, futile search for a spare inhaler, for any kind of medication. And that's when it happened. Marcus, who had been fighting the hardest, who had been gasping and struggling with every ounce of his being, just stopped. His body went slack. His head lolled to the side. He wasn't breathing. The entire class lost it. A collective wail of horror and disbelief went up. Even my twin, Jake, the detached, perfect Jake, was now on his feet, shaking Marcus by the shoulders, his face pale with shock. "Marcus, wake up, man. Wake up," he yelled, slapping his face. At that point, my body wasn't my own anymore. It was as if I was watching a movie. I felt myself rise, my movements detached and dreamlike. My hands grabbed my history textbook, the thick one with the glossy cover, a hefty, solid weight. I looked up at the ceiling. The small, brass sprinkler head was positioned almost directly above Grant's abandoned desk. It hung there like a target, with a surge of adrenaline. With everything left in me, I pulled my arm back and launched the book with all my might. It flew in a perfect arc, spinning end over end. Crack. The sound of the book hitting the sprinkler head was sharp and final. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, a deluge of cold, stale water poured down on everyone and everything. Grant shrieked as the icy water hit her. She scrambled toward me, her face a mask of pure rage, but her sensible shoes found no purchase on the instantly slick floor. She went down hard. "You little—" Her threat was swallowed by the piercing, deafening wail of the fire alarm. The sound was a glorious, beautiful scream of liberation. We heard pounding on the door, the sound of running feet in the hallway. Mr. Wong was back. Open up. Fire. Evacuation. Grant was on the floor, soaked and screaming incoherently. The key to the med cabinet had fallen from her pocket during her fall, and it lay glinting in a puddle on the floor. The moment the door was forced open, I stumbled out into the hallway and collapsed, the cool, solid tile a heavenly relief against my burning face. Someone shoved an inhaler into my hand, and I took a deep, shuddering pull of the albuterol, the medicine a sweet relief in my ravaged lungs. The paramedics worked on Marcus for what felt like an eternity. The rhythmic rise and fall of their compressions, the sharp, clinical smell of their equipment, the awful, violent jump of his body with each electric shock from the defibrillator. But after 20 minutes that stretched into an eternity, they stopped. One of them slowly, solemnly, pulled a white sheet over Marcus's face. He didn't make it. We all looked at each other, our faces streaked with water and tears, and in that moment of shared, shattering grief, there was only one thought in our minds. Grant had to pay. The paramedics were still packing their equipment when 2 police officers arrived. I was sitting on the cold hallway floor, trying to make my brain understand that Marcus, who I'd been joking with in the lunch line just a few hours ago, was actually irrevocably dead. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper from whatever hellish concoction Grant had poured down it. A detective in a rumpled gray suit knelt beside me, his voice gentle, and asked if I could give a statement. I nodded, unable to tear my eyes from the classroom door where they had just wheeled Marcus's body out on a gurney. He helped me to my feet, and we walked to a blessedly empty classroom while other officers began taking statements from my classmates. He wrote everything down in a small notepad as I recounted the story, my voice cracking and raw. I told him about the locked door, the confiscated inhalers, the heavy desk, the darkness, and the scalding liquid she forced down my throat. I had to use my inhaler 3 times just to get through the telling. The ambulance took me and a still-dazed Lily to the hospital. Grant was taken away in the back of a police car. That evening at the hospital, they ran tests on my throat and airways. The doctor informed me that the liquid had caused second-degree chemical burns in my esophagus. A different detective showed up, and I had to tell the whole horrifying story all over again while nurses periodically checked my oxygen levels. I felt numb, disconnected, like I was watching a character in a TV show tell her story. The detective kept asking me to repeat certain parts, and I had to explain 3 separate times how she held me down and forced the thermos into my mouth. Jake showed up at the hospital with our parents around 9 that night. I couldn't even look at him as he hesitated in the doorway, his face a mess of guilt and fear. He started to stammer an explanation, how he didn't mean for things to go that far, how he was just trying to stay out of trouble. I cut him off, my voice cold with a rage I had never felt before. Your need to be the perfect twin got Marcus killed. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I tried to get out of my hospital bed to hit him for real, and my mom had to physically hold me back. My dad, for once, looked utterly lost. He took Jake to the waiting room while my mom stayed with me, crying and apologizing for never believing me when I told her I thought Miss Grant was unstable. The nurse gave me something for the pain, and I drifted in and out of a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. By midnight, my phone, which the police had returned, was blowing up. Our class group chat was a chaotic explosion of grief, anger, and fear. Everyone was sharing their version of what happened. Some people were calling me a hero for triggering the sprinkler. Others, however, said I made things worse by escalating the situation. Katie posted that we all needed to stick together, but I could already see the cracks forming in our fragile unity. Some kids were saying we should have just admitted we were faking to placate her. Others wanted to organize protests and walkouts. The messages were coming in faster than I could read them. The next morning, an email from the school district appeared on my phone. It announced, in carefully crafted, sterile legal language, that Miss Grant had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. They used words like alleged incidents and reviewing protocols. It made me furious. They were already trying to minimize what happened, to frame it as a minor policy violation instead of what it was: negligent homicide. Murder. My mom read it over my shoulder and started swearing about lawyers and cover-ups. The hospital discharged me that afternoon with a bag full of prescriptions for my burned throat and a stack of follow-up appointments. 2 days after Marcus died, the entire school gathered on the football field for a vigil. I stood in the back with my parents, trying and failing not to cry. Marcus's mom spoke, her voice choked with tears, about her son's love of music and how he had just been accepted to 3 colleges. When she mentioned his asthma and how careful he always was with his inhaler, several students around me broke down completely. She looked directly at me when she talked about the heroes who tried to save him, and a fresh wave of guilt and grief washed over me. The principal gave a generic, empty speech about healing and coming together, but no one was listening. After the vigil, Aiden pulled me aside behind the bleachers. He told me he had checked his phone's cloud storage, but the video he tried to take wasn't there. He'd had the phone on airplane mode to save battery. Nothing had uploaded. We both knew what this meant. It was our word against hers, and she would have the backing of the union and a fancy lawyer. That night, the trauma caught up with me. The memory of the emergency sirens at the vigil triggered my first major asthma attack since the incident. I used my inhaler over and over, but it wasn't working. I was convinced I was going to die just like Marcus. My chest got tighter and tighter until I couldn't even stand. My parents found me on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., gasping and crying. They wanted to call an ambulance, but I begged them not to. I couldn't handle the sound of more sirens. My dad sat with me for 2 hours, patiently coaching me through breathing exercises until my lungs finally, mercifully, opened up. Returning to school on day 4 felt like walking into a foreign country. Seeing Marcus's empty desk made it all brutally real again. Someone had left a small bouquet of flowers on it, but the janitor came in and removed them, muttering that it was a safety hazard. Rebecca started crying and had to leave the classroom. The substitute teacher tried to act normal, but she kept glancing at the empty desk. No one wanted to sit near it, as if death were contagious. Whispers of lawyers and lawsuits filled the hallways. A union representative had already been to the school, and word spread that all teachers had been instructed not to discuss the incident with students or the media. Mr. Wong wouldn't even make eye contact with me in the hallway. The wall of silence was deafening, making me feel even more isolated, like we were all living in a collective delusion, pretending a boy hadn't just died in our English class. By day 5, the whispers had turned poisonous. Kids from other classes told me they'd heard Grant was telling people she never said asthma was psychological. The nurse's office implemented a new safety protocol. All inhalers now had to be kept in a brand new locked cabinet with a giant padlock. Students needed written permission from both parents and doctors just to access their own life-saving medication. I actually laughed out loud at the sick, twisted irony of it all. The nurse's face turned beet red as she fumbled with the lock. That afternoon, about 20 of us met in the library. Emma wanted us to write a collective letter to the school board demanding accountability. The meeting quickly devolved into chaos. Half the room wanted to be diplomatic, the other half wanted to burn the whole system down. We argued for an hour about whether to use the word murder or incident. We couldn't agree on anything except that Grant needed to pay. That night at dinner, I asked Jake to sign the watered-down letter we'd finally drafted. He pushed his plate away and said his lawyer had told him not to put anything in writing. The word incident from his lips made me want to scream. He just kept eating as he explained how it could hurt his college applications. I called him a coward. He didn't even look up. The next day, we learned Lily had been released from the hospital. Her mom posted on social media that she had significant, likely permanent, lung damage. The medical bills were already astronomical. That same day, a local news van parked outside the school. Suddenly, our tragedy was a spectacle. The comment sections online were a war zone. Strangers called us liars and attention-seeking teens. Someone found my full name and posted it in a thread about crisis actors. Messages from strangers flooded my social media, calling me a liar and worse. My dad had to change our phone number after the 3rd death threat. Grant's lawyer started pushing a new narrative, a despicable tactic to discredit us. She claimed we couldn't even get the teacher's name right, that some of us said Grant and others said another name. She used this tiny, insignificant detail to try and paint us all as confused, unreliable witnesses. The doubt, like a poison, began to creep into my own mind. Maybe I was remembering it wrong. Maybe the lack of oxygen had messed with my memory. Then the paramedic who had treated me at the scene showed up at our house one evening. He quietly told my mom that they were testing the contents of Grant's thermos. "Whatever was in that thermos wasn't just tea," he whispered. "Based on your daughter's symptoms and the burns in her throat, it was something else." It wasn't public information yet, but he wanted us to know. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. The teachers' union sent a letter to all parents, urging them to wait for the facts, and painting Grant as a dedicated educator of 20 years. My dad crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. 3 days later, the school counselor pulled me out of class to suggest a restorative justice circle where I could sit down with Grant and talk about our feelings. I stood up so fast my chair fell over, and I walked out without a word. A week later, we got a call from the prosecutor, Portia Barron. She wanted to schedule formal witness statements with all the families. She was the first person in a position of authority who seemed to genuinely believe us, who seemed to want to do something about it. That night, Jake came into my room. He told me Grant's defense attorney, Rosalind Barlow, had called our parents, asking if he would be willing to testify about times he'd seen me exaggerate my asthma. "I told them to go to hell," he said, but I could see the profound guilt in his eyes. Late one night, Aiden texted our group chat. He remembered that his phone sometimes automatically backed up to his laptop. He rushed home and found corrupted files with timestamps from that morning. It was a thin hope, but it was better than nothing. My mom scheduled my first therapy appointment with a woman named Sybil Barrera, a trauma specialist. I spent the first 20 minutes in her office just sobbing, unable to speak. She just sat with me, handing me tissues, and her quiet presence helped more than any words could have. The district's listening session turned into a screaming match. Parents and teachers shouted at each other until security had to escort 3 people out. Principal Bentley stood at the microphone, completely having lost control, talking about reviewing policies over the din. 3 weeks later, the toxicology report came back. Grant's thermos contained concentrated mint oil and eucalyptus oil at levels that would cause severe respiratory distress in anyone with asthma. It was evidence of assault. That same week, Rosalind Barlow began telling reporters that I was the one who caused Marcus's death by throwing the textbook at the sprinkler. The reporter, Rihanna Booth, then published her own article, revealing that Grant had a history of similar complaints at 3 other schools. The district had just kept moving her, burying the problem. The district tried to get us to sign NDAs disguised as support services. We refused. Marcus's parents hired a lawyer, Ramona, and filed a civil suit against Grant and the district for wrongful death. Aiden, with the help of a tech expert, managed to recover parts of the audio from his corrupted files. You could clearly hear Grant saying, "Nobody leaves until you admit you're faking." 6 weeks after the incident, the school tried to suspend me for vandalism of school property for setting off the sprinkler. Katie organized a protest, and the local news showed up. The school backed down, but they still sent my parents a bill for the water damage. The next day, over 200 students walked out of class. The school board suspended 17 of them. Lily's test results came back. She had lost 30% of her lung capacity, permanent damage. The grand jury indicted Grant on charges of involuntary manslaughter and 3 counts of child endangerment. At her arraignment, she pleaded not guilty. She was released on $50,000 bail. Seeing her walk free while Marcus was in the ground made me physically ill. The school reversed the suspensions for the walkout protesters, but not for me. Pulling the fire alarm was still destruction of property. The preliminary hearing was a blur of legal arguments. The judge ruled that Aiden's recording and the toxicology report would be admitted as evidence at trial. Grant's lawyer began painting her as a misguided hero, a teacher who made a tragic mistake trying to help. Then, 2 days before the trial was supposed to start, Grant accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 3 counts of felony child endangerment. The manslaughter charge was dropped. The recommendation was for 18 months in county jail. At the sentencing hearing, Marcus's mom stood up and read a gut-wrenching victim impact statement. The judge accepted the plea deal, but reduced the sentence. 6 months in county jail, 2 years probation, and mandatory training on medical conditions. The district held a press conference the next day, announcing new policies, acting like heroes. They never admitted wrongdoing, never apologized, never even said Marcus's name. The civil suit dragged on for months, with lawyers getting rich off our trauma. For months after it all happened, Jake came to my locker and tried to apologize again. I told him, maybe someday, but not yet. Lily started pulmonary rehabilitation. A group of us set up a schedule to drive her to her appointments. It was the only good thing that came out of this nightmare, the way we pulled together when the adults had failed us so completely. My suspension stayed on my permanent record. At graduation, there was an empty chair for Marcus. His smiling face in the yearbook is a constant, heartbreaking reminder. Sometimes I still think about that day. I think about how doing the right thing and following the rules are two very different things. Marcus deserved better. We all did. I'll carry that weight forever, knowing I saved 2 lives, but couldn't save the third. And knowing that sometimes the only justice you get is the knowledge that you tried when everyone else just stood by and watched.